Today is Monday, March 3rd, 2025. I have officially passed the 1 year mark since starting my journey last January in 2024. In this episode, I'm going to talk about two things. First, the Men Having Babies conference, which I just attended for the second time in February this year. Second, since we just received legal clearance with the egg donor, we're now ready to actually schedule the IVF cycle at the clinic. First, men having babies. This was my second year attending. It started in other major cities like New York and I think Chicago, and came to Atlanta for the first time in February 2024. It's only $40 and was well worth it. It was quite a firehouse, even though I had already completed something called the Gays with Kids Academy twice in 2023, which, by the way, is a great educational foundation for understanding the process before you get too far into it. Check it out online at gayswithkids.com and tell Brian Rosenberg that I sent you. So this year, I was on the fence about going to Men with Babies the second time, thinking to myself, what am I really going to get out of it a second time around? And then they sent me a free ticket, so I went. And it was very different given that I'm 1 year into the process. I was able to focus on very specific and new questions I had, as well as contribute a ton of information to others based on my own experience. So much so that I was asking a big question or making a strong comment at many of the sessions I was at. And then people were approaching me afterwards with questions for me, and I was happy to help them out. So for me, this year was more about giving to others than taking. And I met some really nice people whom I hope to keep in touch with as we go through this. So I strongly recommend attending this if it comes to your city or traveling for it. Another funny story is that I recognized two men who were representing an egg donor agency called Elevate, which was not at the conference last year, but I couldn't figure out why they looked so familiar. And then the next day, as I was lying in bed, I realized they had both been in two Christmas movies I watched back in December, namely A Christmas to Treasure and The Holiday Exchange. Their names are Taylor Frey and Kyle Dean Massey. I was told by someone that they are a couple in real life, have two kids of their own, and started this company based on their own experience searching for an egg donor. I have to say, they definitely stood out with a very West Coast Los Angeles feel to them, if that's what you're looking for. And Taylor went as far as to tell us a story about how one set of parents wanted an Olympic medalist, and he was happy to find them one. Not a gold medalist, but a bronze medalist. That's quite a feat, but also quite an odd ask of a parent, I think. While at the conference, I was able to chat with Dr. Scora in Madison Fain from my clinic, Fertility Specialist of Texas, and Kristen Hansen at my surrogacy agency, Simple Surrogacy, also in Dallas. It's always nice to have a face-to-face conversation with people versus just emailing them and having Zoom calls. And I discovered that even though I don't actually have embryos yet, I am close enough to creating them that I can be added to the list of people looking for a surrogate. I just have to pay the first $16,000 of the retainer before I can set up my profile. So that's exciting. Although in reality, my expectation is that it will take all of 2025 to match with one, which means in the very best case scenario, my baby won't be born until the end of 2026. Now on to scheduling the IVF process. Regarding scheduling the first cycle, we are shooting for March 17th, which is the first day of my egg donor's next period. When that happens, she calls the clinic and they put her on birth control pills to do something to her cycle. Then they monitor certain things at day 3 locally. And then sometime later, she starts taking the drugs to stimulate her egg production. And then they continue to monitor her locally. In other words, she doesn't start the process at my clinic in Dallas. That is where she ends the process with the retrieval. I was surprised to learn that it's only about 10 days long, start to finish. For some reason, I thought it took 4 to 6 weeks. Also, one of the other clinics described a situation where the clinic might stop the process very early on due to low AFC, which is antrical follicle count. But I circled back with my own clinic to ask about this, and Dr. Scora said no. There are only 3 things that would cause him to cancel the cycle. 1, some type of cyst on her ovary. 2, not responding as expected to the drugs. And 3, seeing only 1 egg instead of a lot more. So I am waiting for what I expect to be a $20,000 refund from my clinic because my new insurance Progeny is covering the cost of most of this. And I need that money to pay my egg donor agency $10,000 for all of the costs my donor is going to incur. The clinic costs about about $22,500 for the cycle. So this will either happen in mid-March or we'll push it out a month until mid-April. Either way, that will result in some number of eggs, of which I get 50% and she gets 50%. And then my half are fertilized with my frozen sperm, which starts the embryo creation process. I will have much more to tell about that when it happens. In the meantime, fingers crossed for lots and lots of eggs. There's basically an inverted pyramid that describes how many eggs you start with and how many good embryos you will likely end up with. I was reminded of this at the conference this year. Let's say you start with 10 eggs at the top. After all the weeding out for various reasons, you may end up with 2 to 3 viable embryos to transfer. That's a pretty low ratio. So using these numbers, I would actually need 20 eggs to yield 4 to 6 embryos to transfer to have 2 children. Given that I only get half the eggs retrieved, it's highly unlikely she will produce 40 eggs, but the more the better. I think 20 to 30 is a more realistic number. Depending on how many good embryos result, I may actually do a second IVF cycle with her and have already asked if she's open to this, which she is. Despite my insurance paying another $22,000 for this second cycle, without which it wouldn't even be a possibility for me, it's still quite expensive the second time around. Co-fertility requires $4,000, which is half the normal administration fee, plus I'd say $10,000 in expenses and $3,000 in drug costs. So that's $17,000 in expenses, assuming it's the same as I'm paying for the first cycle. My clinic also charges another $5,000 cycle fee, which would bring my total to $22,000. Still a very big number, but without my progeny insurance, I'd be paying another $22,000 out of pocket for each of these cycles, which would be $44,000 total. In sum, each cycle is costing me $22,000 less than it would if I didn't have fertility insurance. And that's my justification for being able to afford a second IVF cycle if needed. The money I'm saving with progeny is paying for the first cycle. The money I'm saving with progeny paying for the first cycle, I am using to pay for the non-medical expenses in the second cycle, about $22,000. So the insurance actually is giving me 2 options here. 1, save $22,000 on doing just 1 cycle, or 2, use that saved $22,000 to fund a second cycle. In this case, the total cost to me is the same, but I get to do 2 cycles. Without progeny, I wouldn't even be thinking about a second cycle. In sum, they would be paying off all the medical costs of both cycles, and I'd be paying all the non-medical costs. In the end, having fertility insurance not only saves you money, but can also open up opportunities you would otherwise never consider. So that's where I am today. I'll wait until the IVF cycle is over before updating you on my status. See you next time. If you have any specific questions you want to run by me, feel free to comment or DM me on whatever platform you're watching this. And thanks for watching.